Thanks a lot for the organizer. I'm glad of being back here. Thanks for including our paper, who's joint work with a bunch of people. We just mentioned the two of them that are here in the audience. One is Tim, who's a PhD candidate at TSC. You want to look him up because he's going on the market this year. And the other one is Chris, who's not on the market, I think. Okay, so let me start motivating. There's it's kind of, everybody knows that there's a lot of cross-country differences in schooling outcomes. But what is also very important and probably less known, is there's the same amount of differences across country actually manifest within countries, and in particular between urban and rural areas. Those reflects most likely differences in access to inputs of key inputs of the production function of human capital. One of those is the access to good and competent teachers, which can be an interesting policy levers compared to other inputs that are more difficult to move across the country. So an obvious question is, in order to level the playing field, why don't we try and move teachers around, and in particular attract them in more disadvantaged areas where kids need them the most? Problem is, as everybody knows, that the market for labor market teachers in the public sector in particular has very rigid wage profiles that usually varies only along a bunch of characteristics like experience. And so economics 101, if the price doesn't move, teachers sort based on other types of attributes of the places, and in particular different types of amenities. And hence, this kind of reinforce the initial disadvantage and gaps between urban and rural areas. So the question we ask in this paper is whether we can kind of break this kind of loop or trap, and to try and shape wage policies or think about how to design wage policies in a way to sort of alleviate or close the gaps between urban and rural areas. So we did this in the context of Peru, which is, I believe, a very interesting setting in terms of like diversity, the span and just the scope, the geographic scope of the country. And we use, basically we do three things. I'm not sure whether I will be able to cover them all given the time. So here is a quick preview. So the first thing that we do is we leverage a whole arrays of different data sets to describe, so the first part is purely descriptive, kind of try to link the existing inequality in the spatial allocation of teacher or competent teachers across the country to their specific labor supply decision, and in particular their location choices. And so we do this, as I said, in different ways, but the key backbones in our data is going to be a very kind of unique administrative data covering basically the entire universe of teachers, schools, and students in the entire country, linking it with job postings and detailed micro-level application decisions in a centralized assignment mechanism. We layered that up with other survey data that actually we collected ourselves, and we use them actually to motivate the model. Sort of the model is going to be about reveal preferences, so we actually elicit specific preferences in our survey to try and elicit how much teachers care about this type of amenities and non-pecuniary characteristics in their location choice decisions. And so this survey data kind of motivates the model. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we do is that we evaluate a policy that was implemented in Peru recently, which actually is a change in the wage schedule, or the presence of these wage bonuses that are assigned to specific eligible areas that are disadvantaged. And we evaluate these policies in two ways, which we see them as largely complementary, as I hope I will convey during this talk. The first is a standard RD design, where basically we look at the local effect of increasing wages, holding everything else constant in terms of the amenities and other characteristics of the schools. And we look at sorting patterns of the teachers, and we look at student outcomes related to these sorting patterns locally. And then we estimate a model of teacher school choice to actually recover the same type of policy effects, but instead of at the threshold, across the entire country. So we're going to look at sort of a global policy effects by simulating the model with and without wage bonuses, and we kind of also recover what happens at the threshold. Sort of this is where the complementarity between these two methods will come around. The third part of the paper, which actually is probably more related to the topic of this conference, is about using market design tools to actually try and do something better than what the government is doing in terms of this type of step function for wage bonuses. Maybe we can design pricing algorithms that are probably more cost effective than this type of discrete jumps that actually are very good to estimate RD effects, but are probably less interesting from the policy point of view in terms of the trade-off between efficiency and equity. So that's a little bit what we're gonna do. That's the menu. I'm not sure I'm gonna have time to talk about the literature. There's a bunch of different places where we think we contribute because we do a bunch of things. Let me get into the context here. So as I said, we're gonna talk about public sector teachers in Peru. We're gonna focus on primary schools. We also have data for secondary school, but the reason why we focus on primary schools is that we're interested in rural areas, and in rural areas, primary school are just, secondary school are very scarce, and so the market is basically saturated on public schools. So there's very little private sector in rural areas, which actually matters for some of the things that I will discuss in the current factors. Teachers have two types of contracts. This is very standard in basically every country in the world. They are kind of either permanent or temporary contracts. Their wage vary by seniority. For the permanent teachers, whereas the temporary teachers, they have a fixed wage on a 1 or 2 year contracts. Then there's a bunch of other school and location specific characteristics that determines the wage schedule in our specific setting. One of those will be the specific eligibility criteria for the rurality bonus that I will discuss in a second for the RD, but there are also others. The good thing is that we observe them all, so we kind of have we span the entire possible variation in wages due to observables. So the other very important aspects about the context is the centralized allocation mechanism, which is a nationwide recruitment drive that has been organized every 2 years for allocating the entire universe of teachers in the public sector in Peru since 2015. So the setting is, I don't have time to get into all the details here. I'm gonna just focus mainly on the allocation of temporary contracts for a variety of reasons. One of those is that these temporary contracts, and in particular temporary teachers, are the vast majority of teachers that get assigned through this assignment mechanism. Another thing is that we're going to focus on wages, and I'm going to show you, or probably not going to show you, but we have in the paper that permanent contracts do not respond directly to wages, and we have, I can get into that offline if you're interested about this. And so we focus mainly on this. And the third reason is that the allocation mechanism for temporary contracts is beautifully simple. It's just a standard one-sided DA where teachers are physically assigned by serial dictatorship based on priorities defined by test score. That's it. And so the last remaining part of the assignment is that for all the postings that are not filled in these sequential steps, they're filled by non-certified teachers. Okay, so that's a little bit of the setting. These are simple descriptive statistics to describe rural-urban gaps across teacher quality on the left panel and student outcome on the right panel. It's probably not come as a surprise. They probably are very general results that applies in many countries, probably including the US. I don't know, but I think. So there's a lot of gaps in both teacher quality, qualifications, and also test scores results. And of course, these gaps kind of are very easy to project spatially. So you see, of course, the more backward areas. If you do like a map of Peru, you do a heat map, you can, which I have, if you want, I can show you. The backward area have, of course, the worst teachers and also the worst students, and the other way around. Of course, these are not causal relationship, but they sort of reflect existing sorting patterns of teachers. Speaking of sorting patterns, one of the nice things about the assignment mechanism is that we can directly relate the spatial allocation that we observe in the country of teacher quality to their choices within the assignment mechanism, because we observe their preferences based on their choice sets and their assignments. So this is a measure of what we call the sort of revealed preferences as measured by this, the allocation of temporary contracts or contract teachers. And here we defined what we define as priority indices. It means sort of is an index of desirability, which is basically how fast the vacancy get filled in a given district. And so you see that, for example, in urban area, more than half of the vacancy get filled by a teacher in the top 20% of the competency score or the priority distribution, which means that they're sort of in high demand. Whereas you see the distribution for rural schools, sorry, is more like shifted to the right, namely that basically they get filled. Some of them don't get filled, like 20% of the vacancies don't get filled and then eventually get into the secondary market. But those that get filled, they get filled by teachers with lower scores. And the underlying results of these sort of preferences in equilibrium, you see that rural vacancies are filled by teachers with 0.5 standard deviation lower scores on average than urban areas. This doesn't mean that the entire gap that we observe in teacher quality across areas is due to choices, but we can clearly link, and we believe this is an important, even descriptive results, the existing inequality in teacher allocations through their choices. These basically teachers like more urban areas according to some amenities or characteristics. And in particular, competent teachers, those at higher scores, like them more intensively. So in terms of the policy, the wage bonus policy that was implemented that I mentioned quickly before, this is a scatter plot of all the school vacancies in the country. There are many, and you see that they vary along these two dimensions, these bonus policies. One is these, they're basically two measures of rurality. The one is distance from provincial capital, and you have the two sort of step function. One is at 30 minutes, and the other one is 120 minutes from provincial capital to define rurality, and the other one is the locality population on the x-axis. So you see that according to these two dimensions, you're assigned different bonuses. They are actually quite generous. In particular, if you go from rural, these figures are in soles, but I will translate them in dollars in a second. But in terms of the base wage, if you go from the light blue area to the dark blue areas, you get a bump in wages of roughly 30%. So it's pretty important magnitude of the salary change. So if you see this picture, of course, it kind of calls for an RD design. So we did it. And so these are two outcomes that we consider just for temporary teachers. The first outcome is the same measure of priority index that I showed you descriptively before in the bar charts. And you see that basically localities or schools that get a higher bonus receive they get filled faster in the assignment mechanism. They get filled by teachers with a higher priority, which the other side of the coin of which is the score at which the teacher that get assigned to has, and of course it has a higher score. So which means that ceteris paribus, the same school getting a bump in wages becomes more desirable in the system. Again, everything else at the threshold doesn't change. So there's just an increase in wages. So this basically schools, they kind of climb up the job ladder in terms of desirability, and they get filled faster in the system, and they get filled by a teacher with a higher score or higher quality, if you want. Okay? So I have other results on the permanent teachers that for sake of time, I don't want to zoom in for the time being. Let me just talk about student outcomes, which is once we have these effects on teacher sorting, I can show you what happens in terms of test scores of the students. And here we have a bunch of different RD samples that are important to tell a story about what's going on, because this wage bonuses applies to everyone, not just the teachers that applies to this assignment mechanism. Also existing and incumbent teachers, both permanent and contract teachers, get the same bonuses. So you may think that having a higher wage sort of increase effort, or sort of there's an efficiency wage story whereby having higher wages sort of increase test scores. So the first column is meant exactly to reject this narrative or this hypothesis, which is focusing on only the schools that had no vacancy open in these centralized recruitment drives during the years of our sample. And there are a bunch. And in case you're wondering, this probability of getting a vacancy open is smooth around the RD threshold. And so you see there are quite precise or imprecise, but very low in magnitude effects on test scores. So this is math test scores. I have the same results for Spanish. They're very consistent. So this means that if you get a higher wage, but there is no sorting, there is no selection effect of teachers, for the existing teachers, there doesn't seem to be an effect in terms of student outcome, column 1. Then from column 2 to 4, we focus on the schools that had an open vacancy. And here you see, starting seeing in column 2, stars are somewhat noisy, but still significant and very large effect on the order of 0.3, 0.4 standard deviation increase in math scores for 2-3 years after this assignment mechanism for the students in the schools. And interestingly, if you split among the vacancies that were filled by a permanent or a contract teachers, I didn't show you, but I told you that for permanent teachers, nothing happened in terms of sorting and nothing happens in terms of student outcomes, column 3, whereas in contract teachers, they really increase their competency score. Here you see it in the RD chart, and you also see a very large increase in student outcomes. So there seems to be a very kind of interesting mapping between sorting patterns and student outcomes. So in the interest of time, I want to wrap up the RD analysis unless there's some questions or I wasn't clear, because there is a question, please.
I usually agree with you. Have any hypothesis why permanent teachers are different?
Why?
The permanent teachers are different.
It's not that they're different. In fact, they respond in terms of climbing the job ladder and making the positions more attractive. It's exactly the same. What happens is that the system is two-sided there. It's way more complicated. And so demand side response is kind of neutralized positive sorting induced by the supply side. So that's what happens. It's not that they don't respond. They do respond, but then there's an equilibrium response on the demand side. That's what we find in the paper. So that's, in fact, one of the things I wanted to say in the wrap up. So let me just, so there's these rural bonuses seem to shift the location choices and the supply of teachers toward disadvantaged areas. The story is that basically there's higher competition. This position becomes more desirable. This increase in equilibrium teacher quality, but it's not ubiquitous. It's actually it's more nuanced than that, and it actually speaks to a very kind of intuitive selection story versus an efficiency wage story, whereby only when the assignment ignores the discretionary step, this is what I just answered to Mike's question, if there's no effect. Another result is that there are no, which I didn't discuss, and I should have, sorry. There's no effect at the extensive margin. So there is an increase in the quality of teachers, but there is not an effect on the share of field vacancies at the cutoff. And this is a result that we're going to explore a lot in the model part. The short answer is, in the local RD threshold, the share of field vacancies is already pretty high. It's like 90–95%. So there is very little scope for increasing that. But across the entire country, there's other places where the share of field vacancies are much lower. It's just that the RD is looking at the wrong, not the wrong, it's looking at a different place, which is why, in a sense, having a global method instead of a local method is useful for some outcomes and not others. Students in those schools perform better, which is interesting, but only in schools that attracted better quality teachers. And also another result that is very important for the equity efficiency trade-off that I'm going to discuss in our counterfactuals. These results seems to be occurring mostly, the effects of having a better teacher seems to be particularly concentrated among lower ability students. So there seems to be a very sort of concave effect in the production function for teacher quality, which actually is very important for some of the considerations on again, what I said about equity efficiency. So all this so far so good. What is, how am I doing time? 20 minutes, okay. So the second part, I'm gonna sort of shift gears and go more to sort of global effect of the policy through a model of teacher sorting. So the model, we have interesting and very sort of detailed microdata. So we want to use the data to really get at heterogeneous preferences over both compensation and non-pecuniary amenities or preferences over J, schools or characteristics. And so we do a bunch of things to try to sort of flexibly incorporate this heterogeneity into the model. We have heterogeneity on the wage, WJ, we have, which actually goes through observed and unobserved characteristics with the random coefficients. We have heterogeneity over the J characteristics, including the determinants of the wage bonuses and the same forcing variables that enters into the RD analysis, both population and time to travel. And we have a bunch of match effects, MIJ, which depends on distance, like the distance of the teachers, where is he or she at the moment of choosing, versus the location, geocoded location of the posting where he or she is applying for. Distance matters a lot in any school choice model, and it actually plays a very important role for teacher choices as well. And also other important ethno-linguistic match effects, because again, we are in Peru, so it's different ethnicity, different indigenous languages that are spoken across different parts of the country. So you have a lot of reason for liking a school that speak basically as a teacher that speak, or that is in an area that speak your own native language. And we have an outside option because there's a lot of teachers that get unmatched, which depends also on individual teacher characteristics, because again, we want to model this flexibly. So that's the model. And how we estimate this model, as I said, part of the kind of beauty of the setting is that it's a simple DA. So we just rewrite the discrete choice problem as the outcome of a simple matching equilibrium with personalized choice sets that we can perfectly observe based on the priority score as defined by the competency indexes, like what you show your students to do in the simplest matching game. Yes?
Are you going to assume stability, or you're going to use telling?
So no. There is no, we don't observe until the release. So we only observe the final match. So truth telling is out of so. And yes, so the system is kind of stable within school districts because teachers choose a school district and then they get assigned by the A, so it's mechanically stable within school district. It might not be globally stable across the entire country. You may think that people choose a school districts where their favorite school is not located. We have some evidence in the paper to show that stability applies globally, but we can talk about this offline. But yeah, but the short answer is yes, we use stability. Talking about the identification assumptions here for estimating this model, again, there's some usual choice sets need to be orthogonal to this preference shifter and conditional observables. And that's kind of because the system is one-sided, this kind of is valid by definition. But the most important identification assumption is on wages, which is actually the most important thing that we want to identify is this alpha I, well, also compensating differentials, how people trade off this alpha I versus all the beta I. And so we really want to make sure that we have good variations in the data to identify these parameters. And we claim we do, because as I said, in our setting, unlike many other settings, wages are set exogenously via deterministic rules, and we can observe them. Now you may wonder, if you control for them, there is not enough variation left. And I would answer, no, it's not true, because I do control for some of the other determinants of the wage bonuses, but I control flexibly for the running variables in the RD, and these flexible polynomials pin down the residual variation that allows me to use the same RD variation for identification of the model. I hope it's clear. So to convey or to bolster the credibility of what we're doing, we kind of do a bunch of model fit validation exercises. The first one is local. Basically, we estimate the model with and without the real wage bonuses. We run an RD on simulated data, and this is what you find in the light blue columns in the right-hand side, and whereas the light blue colors is the dark blue colors is the actual RD that you saw before with actual data, and the light blue, or I don't know whether it's blue or I don't know, it's kind of the other one. It's the simulated data coming out of the model with and without wages. So you see that basically locally, the wage elasticity that is pinned down in the model kind of replicates the same sorting patterns that I've shown you in the RD. So that's kind of the local model validation. On the global side, we kind of look at the entire spectrum of the distance to provincial capital or any other measure of rurality. And we see, for example, a negative gradients in the data, which is clearly not surprising in terms of the share of field vacancy. So of course, the closer you are to provincial capital, the more vacancies are filled, and the more you go away, the less vacancies are filled. So by the way, DRD is around between the first two columns here. So again, not surprisingly, the RD doesn't find much in terms of vacancy field because vacancy fields are already pretty high in the baseline. Whereas if you go around 1,000 kilometers from the provincial, 1,000 minutes from the provincial capital, very far away, then vacancy field is around 40%. And you see that the model kind of replicates this type of extensive margin results. And we have a bunch of other type of global fit results in the paper, if you're interested. So this is the estimated preferences for non-pecuniary benefits. This is the key thing that actually drive our wage policies, and that's why I want to show them to you. So this is the implied distribution of the willingness to pay for a bilingual teacher. Remember, there's a lot of teachers that are indigenous and speak a variety of different languages. Quechua is probably the most prominent one, the one you probably heard, but there are many others. And so here you see that on average, a bilingual teacher is willing to give up one wage, the amount of one wage to be matched with a school that speaks his or her own language. So this is how much match effects and non-pecuniary benefits play a role. Now, the idea of doing optimal wage policies, which is what I'm going to do next, hopefully, time permitting, is that leveraging this type of match effect is crucial because the actual policy doesn't use this. The actual policy just do a step function based on some locality characteristics, whereas leveraging this type of heterogeneous preferences for doing optimal pricing seems to be like a no-brainer. The other thing is distance. Again, there's a lot of this utility for this, and this is moving cost. So again, you need to pay 2.5 the wage of a teacher to make him or her move 50 kilometers away from the current location. So again, teachers are very averse to moving, especially farther away, and they like a lot being matched in a school that there is basically of the same culture and the same language.
So a question is, how should I compare that? Because wage is a monthly wage, and this is a one, moving is a one shot.
Yeah. Well, no, remember, these are permanent, these are temporary teachers. So moving is also, it's not like the present discounted value of moving forever. It's present discounted.
What's the latest of the contract?
The contract is one year renewable, maximum 2. Okay, so that's kind of, once we have estimated a model, I validated using part of sort of the RD variation, so showing you the model fit locally and globally. Let's do the same type of RD exercise, but globally. So let's see at treatment effects, like disaggregated spatial treatment effects across the entire sort of support of the 2-dimensional rurality, time to travel and locality population. So you see in the dark vertical and horizontal line, the RD thresholds. And so let me start focusing on the teacher score, which is the sort of intensive margin outcomes of sorting. And here you see the results that is kind of very speak to the same RD results that I showed you before. So there's a much larger effects of crossing the population threshold, which is the same results that I showed you in the RD. And in terms of magnitude, also it squares pretty well. And there's a lot of, so the data is way more concentrated closer to the distance to provincial capital. The more you go away, data is sparser. The model can still estimate the treatment effects, but the RD results are way more noisy, which is partly why when you look at vacancy field, which is the extensive margin of sorting, at the threshold, you don't find much effects. And you find effects that are concentrated in places that are farther away from the provincial capital, up there in the lower quadrant, which is the place where first the RD is kind of not well identified because data is sparser, and they're not close to the threshold. So it's basically, there are a lot of effect on the vacancy field. It's just that DRD is looking at the wrong place. Another important thing about these charts is that if you take the integral in terms of the magnitudes, you see that the overall effect is positive. So you see, it's not zero sum. No, it's not zero sum because there's teachers that are flowing from the outside option to the inside option. And so the basically wage bonuses are drawing in other teachers that would not have been assigned otherwise, which is why the overall effect is positive and not zero sum. So, much time, another 10 minutes? Cool, because I really want to get to the market design part because of this conference. So let me just take away on this, on the model estimates. And again, if there are more questions or if for some, I was not precise, please, this is the time to jump in. So wage bonus are effective in shifting teacher labor supply. not just at the cutoff, but also away from the policy cutoff. They reduce teacher quality gap for extremely rural versus other rural schools. So there seems to be kind of a leveling the playing field. They also feel very undesirable localities, those that are here. Oh, sorry, probably I should point to the other. Those that are around here, intensively more. And overall, there's a positive net reallocation effect because of these sort of inflows from the outside option. And there's an interesting selection effect that we can uncover using the model. Again, from the outside option to the teachers that get assigned. So far, so good, but then all these kind of effects, you see that are very heterogeneous spatially. So those are cells or like little distance to minutes to provincial capital locality populations. You see how basically you have a plot, you can also plot predicted utilities in the model, and you can already see it from the treatment effects. They're very heterogeneous along the same areas that actually pay the same wage. All these quadrants here, in terms of rural wage bonus, they pay exactly the same 500 soles more. So this kind of screen for something doing better, both in terms of heterogeneous preferences for non-pecuniary or non-wage amenities that actually can be usefully exploited, and also in terms of having a wage schedule that is more flexible instead of this sort of step function, which is what we do here when we do optimal wage policy. Okay, so I hope I purposefully devoted a little bit of time in the talk to this, because this is, I think, is the perfect audience to talk about this, which is how do we design? Now that I hopefully convey the message that we can do better, how can we do better, okay? And so we first pick some equity objectives. We see, okay, let's start thinking about some policy, broader sort of leveling the playing field objective. So there's many, and the method is very general. You can come up with your preferred equity objective if you want, but we fixed two. One is, again, the extensive margin. We want to find a bonus scheme which fill at least one vacancies in every school in the country. Okay, so there are no unfilled schools. And the second is more at the intensive margin, which is find the wage bonus that recruits at least one high quality teacher in each school. And this is more sort of trying to achieve more sort of balanced distribution, spatial distribution of teacher competency or quality across the country. And you may think about what, or wonder what is high quality. Here we define high quality based on the median teacher in urban areas, which, by the way, is meant to kind of replicate the size of the RD jump. The 0.4 standard deviation increase is roughly getting from the average of the rural teachers to the median urban teachers. So here we're sort of making the policy objective, replicating a little bit what happens locally in the RD. So that's the objective. Okay, now how can we compute a cost-effective schedule which is actually consistent with some equilibrium notion? We kind of use two-sided matching seminal results from Hattie Milgram or Kelso Crawford, if you want to go a little bit back. And so we basically make schools bid for teachers in simultaneous ascending auction. We use teachers' preferences as we estimated over school wage pairs, and then we embed the policy objective that I described here into school preferences. So basically, we reiterate DA many times with the school proposing generalized mechanism until the system converge and you achieve objective number 1 or objective number 2 in these slides. Yes.
So if you talk to these policymakers, I would imagine that they might have some other kinds of equity considerations across teachers within the school getting paid the same amount.
So here we're paying everyone the same in the school.
I see. So if you come to Crawford and went to one matching game, you would maybe end up with a situation where two teachers in the same school would get paid different amounts based on their how it sort of pans out. So you're restricting the salary process in some way.
It's basically all the matching with contracts is done at the J level, at the school characteristics, not at the individual characteristics. So, or maybe Tim has something to do, or did I respond correctly?
Yeah, so basically we impose on the set of acceptable wages that wages should be paid all teachers that's trying to say to be praised. So it's a restriction of acceptable practice.
Fantastic.
All right, so we do this, and how this counterfactual wage bonus look like. So the first thing that we show is targeting, how basically our wage schedule target localities differently than the actual policy. So first, you see the total cost. This is in monthly millions of dollars. So the actual policy, the integral of all wage bonuses being paid in Peru in 2015 or 17 is like $0.7 million. And we achieve the extensive margin objective. So the actual policy achieved like roughly 72% of vacancy filled. We get to 100% at a lower cost than the actual policy. So that's already quite cost effective. And although, of course, shifting teacher quality is way more expensive, and you go at 7 times more than the actual budget. And so this is an important result because, of course, the trying to level the playing field in terms of quality seems to be much more expensive for the government than just filling vacancies at the extensive margin. And here you see a breakdown of this cost, share of total cost in terms of, like, again, distance and rurality status. And you see that our optimal policy target locality differently, and in particular it targets exactly the locality that are very, very far away here, way more aggressively than what the wage bonus that is fixed for everyone does. So this is the second column here. And also it also targets some urban school. This may be surprising because you're saying, come on, urban, but there are a lot of urban schools that lack important amenities that teachers value, and hence the optimal wage policy kind of adjusts even to urban schools that the status quo actual policy doesn't, for example. Okay, so that's my favorite graph. Let me see if I can explain that to you. So on the B charts, you see the actual policy and the two outcomes of the actual matching outcomes. So this is, again, vacancy filled and quality teachers in each school. And here you see already how it is difficult to attract quality teachers, which is the light bar here. So you see that, for example, this is the quantile of proximity of provincial capital. So you see, these are the places that are more farther away. They basically have no high quality teachers at all, and they go up a little bit, but still they remain very low. Whereas the extensive margin is already doing pretty well in terms of the status quo. The panel A is what we do with the optimal policy, and this is the same quantile of proximity to provincial capital as a measure of rurality, and this is kind of the cost efficiency frontier, if you want. So on the black line, the black horizontal line is the total cost of the actual policy. And here you see the cumulative cost of achieving progressively the objective of vacancy filled as you go along the distribution of proximity to provincial capital. And you see that you can actually achieve that objective, which is the same result that I've shown you before, except that before I only showed you the 100%. Here I'm showing you how we got there. For the vacancy filled, you achieve 100% of vacancy filled at a lower cost at the government. Here you see the same result that I showed you before, which is, okay, in terms of quality, the curves steep up very fast, and it becomes very fast, very, very expensive for the government to achieve this. It costs like more than $4 million to basically leveling the playing field in terms of quality. But you see that at balanced budget, you can achieve 100% of high quality teachers being matched in the last decile of proximity to provincial capital, which are the most remote school in the country, whereas the status quo actually only achieve, I don't know, 5% of this. We achieve 100% of this at exactly the same cost. So this is a measure of cost effectiveness in terms of quality. And so that's kind of a back of the envelope calculation that we did using the RD results. I show you the production function is very concave, remember? So one high quality teachers benefit way more very sort of disadvantaged students. The share of disadvantaged students in this initial decile is much higher, of course, than in any other decile of the distribution of remoteness. And so using the amount of basically the RD estimates and the share of students in the first decile of remoteness, we find that the share of underperforming students in most remote school would decrease from 80% in the status quo to less than 50%. And this is clearly a lower bound in the actual policy at balanced budget. So we wouldn't even increase of one solace the budget to taxpayer just by making wages more effective, or making basically pricing incorporate heterogeneous preferences. That's, I think, is the main message here. I have 1 minute. Yes. Okay. So let me conclude. So I show you evidence that raising unconditionally pay, so this of course has nothing to do with pay for performance, in case you're wondering now at the end of the talk, there's nothing on pay for performance here, can be consequential for both teachers and students. They shift labor supply toward disadvantaged areas. They increase teacher quality across schools with a positive net relocation results through changes from the outside option and unassigned teachers. And there are very large, although quite noisy, but large effects on student outcomes that actually come through the selection channels of recruitment and don't come through efficiency wage of the incumbent teachers. The second thing that I want to say in the last 30 seconds is that we show you ways of using market design tools to design cost-effective pricing policies in the context of a public sector, whereby it's kind of the distribution of frontline worker and the quality of frontline worker, not just in education, but you can think about health or many other sectors, play a very big role in delivering public goods. And because of the extent to which this kind of centralized mechanisms have been increasingly used across the world for entry-level position in both the public and private sector, we believe that this type of tools and methods can be applied more generally. Thank you.